welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we continue our retrospective on the Alien films, but we are not going forward with the Alien series itself, although we may, in fact, get to them eventually. Instead, we are looping back to what we call the Road to Alien with the 1958 film It, The Terror from Beyond Space. This is episode 328 of the Castle of Horror. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, publisher at Castle Bridge Media. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards is the writer-creator of the long-running underground comic Halloween Man, currently published by Comixology. He is a Best Writer Ringo nominee, Austin Chronicle Best of Austin Award winner, and a member of the PEN America Fellowship. Say hello, Drew!
I'm speaking to you from the far-flung future of 1973.
And finally, also in Denver, color commentary, Lady Doctor of the Future, Julia Guzman.
I'm Lady Lawyer of the Future.
You're
a Lady Doctor of the Future, because he served me something, and then he goes, I'm a Lady Doctor of the Future.
Yes. All I know is that means one of you is bringing me coffee.
One of us
exactly.
That's
exactly.
Of course.
What a complicated film. It, The Terror from Beyond Space, is an independently made 1958 American science fiction horror film produced by Robert Kent, directed by Edward Cahn, and it stars Marshall Thompson, Shawn Smith, Kim Spalding. The film was distributed by United Artists as a double feature with The Curse of the Faceless Man, and I don't know that movie. The movie is about a rescue mission of a ship called the Challenger 142 that is headed to Mars to pick up the one remaining survivor of the Challenge 141, which then that one remaining survivor, they are going to bring him back to stand trial for the murder of all of the other crew members, because he suggests that they were all killed by a monster. But of course, that's ridiculous. So they're going to go pick him up and bring him back to Earth to stand trial. And that guy's name is Carruthers. So let's get started. Let's work our way through it. This movie is barely a movie. I mean, it's only about like 68 or so minutes long. So we are going to try to reserve our discussion of it to about the length of the film, if we can do that, or less. So let's go, Julia. We haven't started with you in a while. Julia, Tony, Drew, and then I'll go. Julia, It, The Terror from Beyond Space, a trip to the future of the past, of the way past in 1958. Tell us about it.
I'm glad you started with me, because even as you're describing the thing, I'm shaking my head like, because it drove me bonkers. So many things about this movie drove me bonkers. So it drove me bonkers that when they pick the guy up, they're like, okay, obviously you murdered everybody because they're all dead and one of them has a bullet hole in his skull, and so you murder everybody. So then we cut to Earth, where they're giving news to the press conference, and the people are like, oh, guess what, we found alive. We thought that all these astronauts were dead, but we found one alive, but it turns out that he may have murdered his fellow crew. And all of the journalists take off running to go report the story. I'm like, do we care about why they think that? Or like, what did they find? Anything? No. And then there's just so many little things from that point forward that that I'm so irritated by. But I don't want to say that the film is irritating in general, because actually I think there's some great things about it. It's just a wonderful, that I love the whole future space look of 1959. I think it's fantastic. I actually have a lot to say about that, all of that, and and whether or not, I have a lot more to say, but I want to save it for later. But yes, mixed feelings about this film. Because yes, there's some awesome things, but it's just annoyed the crap out of me in so many ways. So I'll hold the rest.
All right. Thank you. Tony, opening thoughts. It's The Terror from Beyond Space.
I think mainly, the reason we picked it was because it's touted as an influence on Alien. And I like, B-movies, sci-fi B-movies, black and white B-movies. I think its potential exceeds what's actually on camera. It's not particularly compelling, even though it has some cool bits, but mainly it's a cool exercise in seeing, wow, okay, well that's, I can see how that influenced Alien. I can see how that influenced other similar movies. And to me, it could have been interesting. I would have liked to see more kind of, it starts out like maybe this is going to be like a locked room procedural kind of thing, but no, that's just kind of the setup for getting this guy off of Mars and onto a spaceship.
Yeah.
But there's so many bits that we'll discuss as we move through that's like, oh, okay, cool, kind of neat creature effects, but they're not spectacular. It's more of the interest to me. The real meat of it is the interest in what it influences, what it brings to later movies. I don't think it's terrible, but it's not one I would probably rewatch a ton of times, other than just to kind of get that flavor.
Yeah, excellent. Drew, what are your opening thoughts?
I enjoyed this quite a bit. I actually have never seen this before, which kind of surprised me. It's one of those movies that almost feels like I'd seen it because I've seen so many clips of it, and I'm certainly very familiar with the creature suit because it's a Paul Blithedale creature suit. So it's one of those things you see in a lot of monster magazines and websites, things of that nature when they're talking about his work. It's a fun movie. It's probably it's both worse and better than you expect it to be. There's some really cool, like, claustrophobic, tense stuff in this movie, and it does kind of have that atmosphere to it. But then there's also some really stupid stuff like setting off grenades on a spaceship. And it's
many things. Many things.
So it's kind of a mix. Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. And in terms of like that sort of ray gun gothic aesthetic, this one doesn't go, because it's such a low budget movie, it doesn't go as far into that.
Okay, educate us on that. That sounds like an amazing term.
Ray gun
when I
gothic,
say, hey man, let's have a Friday evening with some ray gun gothic movies, what are those?
Ray gun gothic is the sci-fi aesthetic, basically Forbidden Planet. Technically it goes back to Forbidden Planet, but for purposes, for the easy explanation for people who listen to this, you would say Forbidden Planet to Star Trek the original series. It's that look and aesthetic and that style, and this is firmly in that vibe, but except there are no ray guns. Weirdly enough, everybody fires bullets, which makes no sense again in a spaceship. But it's got a rocket ship. It's got those big poofy Wally-Wood looking spacesuits. It's got all that stuff that I like a lot. Again, it was very low budget, so it's not quite as cool looking as Forbidden Planet, but I still like all the stuff that kind of science fiction era, that's era of science fiction gives you. I think it's, before I'll move on, I'll let Jason take it, but I also want to say that I think, while I can see how this was an influence on the Alien movies, I think in some ways people are sometimes being a little generous in that, because it's not that much like Alien. But I'm sure we'll get more into that as we go on. All right.
Yeah, no, I hear you. As far as the being an ancestor of Alien, I think it kind of works in almost the other direction, which is that, Dan O'Bannon probably is more interested in ripping off the general principle. Like, he's probably got several things in mind, land on a planet, pick up a monster. There are a couple things that are very similar to Alien, but probably mainly it's this big idea. Land on a planet, pick up a monster. That's the setup, and it's there in several of these B films. What you call ray gun gothic, I've never really known that term, and I like it a lot. But I associate it with any of these things where actors like Leslie Nielsen are wearing these jumpsuits and calling one another by military names and flying rocket ships and landing places. I have a giant Queen of Outer Space poster in my office. It's staring at me right now, and it's much the same thing, except for this one. This one has Ray Crash Corrigan in a monster suit instead of Zsa Zsa Gabor. And I don't know which is cooler, actually, to be honest with you. But okay, my thoughts very briefly, and then I just want to go into it. I love this movie. Oh my God, this is in the imaginary, like wall to wall playing movies all the time. It's really cool. I love seeing some of my favorite character actors show up. Dabbs Greer, who plays the preacher on Little House on the Prairie and was in House of Wax and like made 500 million movies and lived a super long time. He's here. What's his name? Paul Langdon, who I feel compelled to mention anytime we watch a movie where one of the major players was also a cast member of Peyton Place. He was. So I love this. I'm seeing faces I like. It's a lot of fun. So okay. Let's get started. It is the far-flung future of 1973. One thing I have to say about that is the guys who made this movie in 1958. What is that? That's like 15 years. Why? It's an unanswerable question. We would have to just guess. But
see, I already have things to say about that.
Why on earth would you call it 1973? I mean, that's 15 years.
No, but
anyway,
I already have things to say about that because think about it now.
Okay.
If you look at that time period and then you look at what happened. In 1969, they end up going to the moon. The 1958 guys don't know that in 1969 they will go to the moon. They just know that space is happening sometime. There's no reason in 1958 for you to know that it's that much harder to go to Mars than it is to go to the moon. Like, why would you know that? So if we can go to the moon in 1969, why can't we go to Mars 4 years later? I think that's fine. Because if you look at the amount of progress we made in a 15-year period from the early 90s to 2005, just like, or even like from like mid 90s to 2010, going from the internet is a system of tubes or whatever it was, network of tubes, to the way that to smartphones, just like the kind of progress that we've made. I think it's perfectly believable that they could have done that if they had set their if President Kennedy had gotten up and said, we're going to Mars, why not? Like, sure. So it's just because we haven't prioritized it. That's why we haven't gone, and we know how difficult it is, but they didn't necessarily, and it's a fictional movie. So I have no problem with that. And I love the idea that you would think this could, like, if you watch a Terminator style movie now, the idea that, in 15 years, the robots will take over everything and destroy the earth and humans will be an afterthought. I totally believe that. Like, I'm like, 15 years, I totally see it. And 15 years from now, people might be like, why would you think that? But yes.
The one that I do worry about is this notion that 15 years from now, like you have that movie Split Second, which I guarantee you very few people are bringing up Split Second and saying, well, that's a movie I think about often. But I do think about Split Second often because it is all about a flooded London. It's also about a big monster that somehow is psychically connected to Rutger Hauer. But setting that aside, it's about flooded London, and I think about that a lot. Sure. Anyway, so what does the far-flung future of 1973 look like in terms of...
good news for women. We can be on this mission, and we can, as long as you're white, we can be on the mission. We can be a doctor.
It's not a very diverse crew.
We can be a doctor on the mission, but we're still serving the coffee for all the men, even if we're the doctor.
So I'm curious if everybody noticed this, and I. The more I thought about this, the more I was really having a hard time wrapping my head around it. But then I tried to think about real life. It's like, okay, I'm surrounded by women who are nurses and doctors and lawyers and all this stuff. But would the women get up and start pouring the coffee? I don't know.
So here's what I think. I think in real life, there are, because I was talking to Jason about this, in our household, I am very likely, if I have a bunch of people over, to be the one who gets up and starts pouring coffee and putting away dishes and whatever. But so is Jason. Like, we're equally likely to be that person. So I don't have a problem with the idea that the women would be doing this. The difference is that in that time, the men would never be doing that. It's just not a thing. It's like, it's ridiculous that the men would be doing it. And that's where they didn't really, so they thought forward to, I could see women being on this mission and even one of them being a doctor, but I can't possibly envision that men would also be getting it made sense. It would have made sense if they'd had like one woman, if they were forward thinking, one woman and one guy doing it, or even two guys, whatever. They're just taking shifts. Like, tonight is my night to serve the coffee. But no, it's always going to be the women because that's how it was, and that's what people thought of.
The general vibe seems like it's okay for you ladies to have a career as long as it doesn't get in the way of you taking care of me.
And that's
Yeah.
still true.
Yeah.
That is
Well,
still true for a lot of us. Like, no, really,
Right,
I
right.
don't mean for all men. I
no.
just mean for like if I have children, I can have my career, but I feel, and I'm putting this on me because of my upbringing and the cultural influence. I believe that I should also be the one after I come home from work to make sure that the children's, stuff is taken care of, that the kids get bathed. I'm talking about like when they were smaller. The kids now we pretty equally divide the responsibilities of like checking grades and all that kind of thing. But when they're little, I put it on myself that I needed to be the one to make sure that they had the proper clothing that fit them, that everything is washed, that they have their lunch for tomorrow, all that stuff, because that feels like women's work. And I get that there's not all women are that way anymore. Like there's plenty of women who are like, no, dad can handle that. He likes that, and that's fine. Or they completely split it. But I feel like there's still a great deal of most women, I think, feel responsibility for taking care of at least the children, if not the household, even if they have a career. And more women are more likely to be the ones who stay home if somebody's going to stay home still.
Yeah.
Tony, were you?
Juxtapose that. Yeah, juxtapose that from like when we went to Norway, we saw a lot more guys, pushing strollers in the middle of the day in the park and everything. And I asked, a friend of mine, like, hey, that's pretty cool. It seems like, and he said, well, it's the difference is how much time off. We have leave. Both parents have leave. You should probably take your leave if you're the guy in the relationship. And so, but it was just no big deal. Also, by the way, a lot of the banter that's here is not that much different from the banter we see in Aliens when all the Marines come out of cryo sleep. It's the same kind of like, it's not as crass, but it's similar. Like it's really similar, which is hilarious to me.
The funny thing is about that comment is there was stuff about this, as much as everybody's like, oh, this is an influence on Alien. And I'm not saying it wasn't, but there was stuff that actually did remind me a bit more of Aliens, like them rigging, as dumb as it is, but them rigging the door with grenades at that one point. Like that seems straight out of like them booby trapping, that one hallway, that one entrance in
and we can jump around. Let me just point out in that sequence, I thought it was interesting that they never, I often wonder, like, maybe the audience in 1958 is intended to understand things a lot better than somebody in more removed. Like I see them, they're tossing grenades to one another, and then they put them on the thing that I think the monster might come through, and then they rig a wire through all the grenades, and they tie it to a thing. Do you recognize, by the way, there is no dialogue anywhere in here where they say, let's build a booby trap out of grenade. I mean, they say,
there's no dialogue on anything. Like it's such a dialogue light movie where the guy I was like, when they finally figure out that there's an alien, nobody describe, like, somebody sees the alien and he does not have to describe the alien to anyone else. Apparently he does that off screen because somebody goes, well, he said that this and this, but we didn't see that. Everybody just kind of goes, oh, okay, so the alien thing is real. Nobody apologizes to our astronaut who got accused of murdering his
Carruthers,
people, except finally one of the women goes, oh, you were right, by the way, we were wrong. I'm like, finally somebody says that, but like very, very short on dialogue. There's not, it's very much of a show don't tell kind of movie.
Well, even the guy goes, well, I guess, there's this feeling that's basically akin to, well, I was wrong, but still there's an alien here. So why'd you bring that around?
Right.
Like, good grief, come on, you can't get a break.
That's the other thing is, I'm sorry, go ahead, please. Yeah.
No, it's just, that's how, this is, everybody hates Carruthers.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not like he has a great, fantastic, charming personality, to be honest with you.
He has been by himself on Mars after all of his castmates or crewmates got killed. So
yeah, and he also knows that he may or may not. I think we can go through it. He may or may not have shot one of his friends.
Yes,
by
indeed.
accident.
Right. Nurse Anne,
but even then, like, he's not one of those people that the way it's played isn't. He's not a very charismatic person. Even in his trauma, like you've seen movies where you feel for them, but how stoic he is. Yeah, I wish people would believe me, and that's his character throughout it. That was really hard because and also but that also could be because nobody wants to believe him anyway. That he's like, screw it. If you think I did everything, then fine. You're going to ramrod
the
this
hilarious
space
thing
crew anyway.
The way that they treat him is hilarious. I've never seen anything like this. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's an interesting choice that all of them are like, we picked up Mr. Carruthers, this boring dude who apparently his one major skill is keeping himself alive no matter what. We think he committed murder and killed like 7 people. We're going to take him back to stand trial, but we're also going to like play chess with him and just hang out.
Yeah, he's definitely not going to be locked up or anything. No.
It's so great. And they say, you're going to have somebody with you at all times. And they even drop that like within like a day. It is hilarious. I love the sort of, it's like if Dr. Smith on Lost in Space, if they literally thought that Dr. Smith had murdered the crew of the last ship and they still just had him just hanging out with them. And, actually it's a lot like that, come to think of it. But
and getting back to what Drew was saying about the grenades, it is remarkable how much blowing stuff up and shooting and smoking and whatever they do in this very small rocket. I'm just like, how are they, apparently oxygen is not that important, because at one point they finally decide that the way to get the monster is to just take all the oxygen out of the ship. So at any given point, and then the radiation, like that, I'm sorry, there's so many things. At one point they go, I know, let's kill him by doing whatever, like what are they, like
by taking the shielding away from the nuclear
the shielding away from the nuclear reactor. And then the monster goes, the alien goes, no, that's not going to kill me. Not only is it not going to kill me, but I'm going to bust through this wall and go ahead and release all of this radiation into the rest of the ship. But that's fine. Apparently nobody. I'm just like, what? These people are apparently completely immortal, because nothing kills them and nothing kills the ship. Like nothing pierces the hull of the ship, because, like you said, all the grenades and all the shooting and all of the whatever else they're doing, nothing ever seems to impact. They're never at risk that even when they open the door, they're never at risk that anything bad's going to happen to the integrity of the ship. I don't know. There's just so many things.
Yeah, but I mean, the monster is actually. I will say though, the threat of the monster is interesting, because in the same way that Alien is, this monster, is superimposing when it's on screen. Lurks about. And it is dangerous. In fact, not only is it dangerous by attacking people, but it has some kind of disease that it can spread. The
monster is one of the things I like.
Sort of kind of the analog.
I thought the effect was good, and I thought even though, despite all the issues they had with the costume and the mask, but I thought the effect was great. I thought he was a very scary monster. So that part I thought was cool.
Well, like there is some legitimately unnerving stuff surrounding the monster too, like when they're in the air duct looking for one of the other astronauts, and they come across him and he's all pale and torn, like he looks like he's been had his arms broken or something, and kind of the way he's shaking his head, like all of that stuff is super creepy.
That's pretty grim, isn't it?
For sure. Yeah, I agree.
And again, when he gets, one guy gets sick, and especially like when he realized, like, hey, I'm probably not going to make it. Like, nothing we're doing affects whatever crazy disease this is. And while I agree with you that a lot of it isn't, it's not like Alien just lifted all of this, right? In fact, it could be one of those deeply submerged memories where you do something later and realize, oh, holy crap. Well, now that I've seen The Terror from Space again, there's this scene that's like that. So not to say like the chest burster is at all ripping this off or anything like that, but it's neat to see these seeds of, hey, there's a person who's sick and we have to take care of them. Like all of these bits make it interesting to kind of watch the DNA of what would become future sci-fi movies. Maybe not even just directly Alien, but kind of where that goes.
Factually speaking, we know that this was an influence on Alien because Dan O'Bannon, the screenwriter of Alien, told John Carpenter in a conversation that he had with him, which John Carpenter loves retelling the story. And I've seen him repeat it in interviews several times, that this was an influence on Alien. So like, I don't doubt that. but I'm saying that there is a lot of other movies that I'm sure were also influences on Alien, and this movie has good stuff in it. I'm not trying to shame in it and everything, but there is so much original ideas too in Alien, like the chest burster, like the creature design, like the fact that, like, we were just I was just talking about ray gun gothic at the start of this. Alien brought in a completely different vision of the future, which I talked about a lot in the first 2 episodes in this retrospective. It was a very blue collar, not slick, not glossy 1950s, 1960s atomic age future. It's a very different thing. So there's I think you can look at these movies and say this is where Alien came from, and I'm not saying that's a shameful thing, right. But I think when I hear people say, "Oh, well, Alien ripped off this movie," I think that's being a little generous. I think that's also not giving Ridley Scott or Dan O'Bannon enough credit that there isn't. The Alien wasn't more than a sum of its influences, which it absolutely is.
I agree with you completely, and that's why I think the fairest way to put it is, like we said, the road to Alien. In the same way that we did, several years ago now, sort of the path of movie zombies and how they went through these various and elements get picked up, but there is no way in hell that you can look at Night of the Living Dead and say, oh gosh, what a ripoff of White Zombie, because it's another planet, it's another universe from that and all these other films that we had looked at before, even though they're wonderful. By the way, I think that the funny thing is, when it comes to headspace, like you mentioned, and we've talked often about how Alien has a very sort of blue collar, management versus labor, headspace. And Aliens, the second one, has a very sort of 1980s obsession with Reagan era militarization feel. This movie is Army. That's what's wild to me, is that this one feels like it's written by people. If think of it, you've got to fill up like 70 pages of screenplay, right? So you got to come up with, okay, well, I don't know, what are they going to do when they're sitting around? They're going to sit around playing cards. This may as well be a submarine movie, or a Battle of the Bulge movie sometimes, when they're just like playing chess or playing cards or yelling orders from one another, or the thing where one guy's pinned down and he's radioing to the others and they're like apologizing to one another. This is all World War II trope stuff that we've seen 1,000 times, and it's neat. Go ahead.
Except nobody's rigging. If this had been a submarine movie, no one would have rigged grenades inside a submarine along the hull of a submarine.
I mean, my Marvel no prize for that
really
is
dangerous.
My Marvel no prize for that is maybe they're not fragmentation grenades. Really, maybe they're something else. But I can't.
Sure.
It's nothing I can do with it.
Just the sheer amount. It kind of made me want, like, well, when I'm working down here in what's essentially the basement of the rocket, right? The way they, you just see a bunch of like sledgehammers. Like, whoa, we're working in the basement of the rocket. We work with sledgehammers. Like, no, especially now that we have sci-fi that's, there'll be a lot of realistic sci-fi where, secure that bolt. Or else, make sure that screw doesn't come loose. Or else
it'll fly through the air and destroy something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Here they're like, rig up grenades. Hey, you got guns? Shoot those next to the hull.
And rig up grenades. Like, let's describe, for those who haven't seen this movie, which is probably most of the people, that we're talking about. It's a great that it leads to an event where they believe the monster is,
because the monster gets around in events. Yeah,
I didn't count it, but I'm gonna say it was like at least 6, maybe 8 grenades all in a row, and then they run a wire through it so that when the monster comes through the thing, all the pins will pull. Why do they need so? I mean, I guess the idea is, obviously this guy's big, and so we need enough to kill him. And it doesn't. He's not scratched at all. Like, the only thing that ever happens to him is his eyes seem to be bothered by some of the things. Occasionally, he's kind of grabbing.
Well, he doesn't seem to like fire, but they never.
Yeah, eventually we get the flamethrowers, or it's a settling,
which is also an alien.
I mean, they're rigging up torches. Yeah, alien.
Yeah, but they never seem to do much with that.
Fire, he's just using the flamethrower to keep him away from him.
I love. There's a moment when they're like, okay, there's definitely a monster on board. It's killed a few people. So let's lay all our weapons out on this, this 2x6 table just to see what we got. And they have like, it looks like about
So many guns.
I'm going by memory here, but they got a bunch of M1 rifles. They have a bunch of 45 semi-automatic pistols. They have grenades. They have glass grenades. They have a bazooka. Did they think?
Did they think there would be life on Mars that they would need to shoot, and then once they went to Mars, they went, oh wait, maybe not, and so now we don't believe that there was life on Mars, and therefore you must have murdered your. Like either there's dangerous life on Mars, and we need all these guns, or there's not, and obviously the guy killed his crewmates. What? Like why?
Well, I mean, with the weapons, they also, because it is kind of an interesting. I kind of wish they would have had a little bit more meat on the procedural part, because there is where he says, "Look, we found the skull, and basically, I don't think aliens are firing guns."
Right.
And there is this realization, but I mean, Carruthers is so bland; he doesn't really give anything. But it would be nice to see some. Wow, he's remorseful.
Yeah.
But when they bring it up, the whole thing is it was such chaos that they were shooting, and so obviously somebody it may or may not have been him shot one of the other astronauts, and that's really tragic, and it's kind of a shame they don't do more with some of that, and it's because it's really interesting bits.
Yes.
Bringing that kind of procedural stuff into it is really something I wish had been explored a little bit more.
Well, they don't do dialogue. So
but yeah,
that would have been dialogue.
But I think that the idea is we don't know what's on Mars, but that you can
space vampires, man.
Yes,
Space Force. Mm-hmm. The Space Force is going to have M1s and grenades and bazookas.
Right. The great thing about a bazooka in space,
again, you're supposed to set all of that stuff off like when you're down on Mars.
Yes.
But no, they're using it in the ship.
I would have loved to have seen Carruthers out on a spacewalk, since they don't tether themselves to the ship. They use
oh my god, that was another thing that really bugged me.
Imagine though how cool it would have been if there had been a fight. Carruthers gets knocked out of the airlock. He's outside. He loses his tether, but he has a bazooka, and he uses his bazooka to force himself back to the ship by aiming it in the opposite direction.
I kept saying to Jason various things during the film where I go, maybe they're going to do this, and he's like, I don't think this movie is good enough to do that. And I think, Jason, the same applies there. This movie was not good enough to do that.
Well, I don't even think it's a matter of good. I think that they tried a lot of things considering the amount of money.
Yes, indeed.
That they have to work with. I think there is a lot of ingenuity
for sure.
And damn it, all the actors, like they're really they are trying. Like I wouldn't call like the acting in this.
It's not an Ed Wood movie. Yeah. No, I agree.
I mean
it's quite clever. I mean, when they walk down the ship, the notion of like, hey, we know where the monster is, so let's go outside the ship and crawl down the side and get in under him. All this is great. I
think they do a good job of, like, I didn't find the geography of this, the layout of the ship to be confusing. I think they did a good job of like establishing where things are, which a lot of B movies don't do a good job of. So, I gotta give them, I gotta give them credit. Like I think that this movie, the parts that it does well, it does very well. It's just the parts that are stupid, like again, like they're firing a rocket launcher on a spaceship, is really dumb.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's just because we're used to living in the future, which we really do live in the future for them. And we're used to, like, if you want to research something, you have it at your fingertips. And we're spoiled, and they didn't have Google, and they couldn't go question, is it dumb to set off explosives on a rocket ship? And Google would have been, fuck yes, it's dumb. Why would you do that? Or maybe
there's something else I'll point out, though. Well, and there's how you've talked often, Drew, about the rule of cool, right? You do something because it looks cool. There's a corollary to that where you can do something if you don't think anybody will bother knowing about it. Like exactly what you're talking about. In other words, like if you kind of assume that everybody in the country, when they see this, is just going to go ho-hum and they'll just go right past it, then it's safe. What the hell? It doesn't matter.
That's probably true. I think
You know?
you're probably right about that.
Yeah,
And
I
now
think
is
that-
I mean,
different.
because it looks cool to shoot at the monsters with guns. Blowing stuff up is great. Shooting a bazooka at something is great. As far
Yeah.
as if you're going to take out a
think
monster. So
some of that was like budgetary, because normally in a movie
Sure.
in this type, I hate to keep bringing up Forbidden Planet, which,
Please.
side note, we should totally do Forbidden Planet at some point.
Yeah.
Normally in a movie of this type, the heroes would have ray guns, but I don't think that this movie had the money for those kind of props and things
Interesting.
like that. So
Right.
maybe
Well,
that's also why they just did guns.
it is also, all of those weapons are army weapons. You say, oh, this is firmly army.
Yeah.
Like, all of that makes sense because all of those are army weapons. So you have the props from whatever war movie that you're shooting,
Mm-hmm.
or left over from war movies. Like, all of that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And it is true that, any number of things could be, well, who's going to care if we aren't going to talk about what it would be like to pierce the hull, because nobody's really going to care at this point in, moving towards going into space regularly, right?
Yeah.
We don't know what all those things are. And again, it looks cool. And once you establish that it's, firmly army as far as how we're going to proceed with this, that's what you have and that's what people know. So it still makes sense and it clicks. Like, now we kind of poo-poo it, of course, like we're talking about, like, that seems like a really bad idea. But in the realm of, hey, I'm going to go see this movie at a drive-in or, in a theater with some friends, the idea of, hey, we got to take out this monster, and yet still it resists all these weapons that we've seen will kill men. We know them from the war. We know that they kill people. We've seen all these things in movies, and then you might have seen it for real. So the fact that none of that affects the monster is pretty scary.
Yes,
when you think about that. And it might in some ways, not to be too much of an apologist, but it might have more gravity than if it was, ray gun X9.
Yeah.
You don't know what a ray gun X9 is, but you know what an M1 and a bazooka and a grenade are.
Yeah.
So
you're right.
Maybe, that while it is budgetary, it's also, it does what it does, but I think maybe that's part of it is everybody's going to understand these things.
Yeah.
And why don't we just use them? Even if in retrospect, like, we can laugh at it a little bit now. Like, that's a really bad idea. But it makes sense within the context of what you know at this point in time when the film is being made. And I think that it means something,
Absolutely. Getting back to the sickness of Van Huysen, who's kind of in charge, or Hewson, I think they say Houston, Van Hewson. He's kind of in charge at the beginning, and he's the one, though, who they find out what the monster does. The monster, if he doesn't just claw you to death, the monster will scratch you and give you an infection, which essentially gives you a cancer. And if the monster sticks around, he figures out a way to drink all of the liquid out of you. But regardless, even if he doesn't stick around, you're going to die of this thing. They say it's given him leukemia. And that, which is really scary. I don't actually recall if they ever let us know if they're going to fix Van Heusen. Like, I'm not clear on. He's still alive.
Well, they're trying.
Yeah, but when they get to
they're
Earth,
trying various things throughout the movie.
Yeah,
and they have to come to terms with, look, nothing we've done everything space medicine can do,
and that's all pretty serious.
That's a big thing.
It's played so straight, right? This is not for kids. It's not it's played totally like a melodrama that you would hear. The doctor is going, I've done everything I can. And Van Heusen is like, well, I'm sad that Nurse Anne is not in love with me anymore. She's now in love with Carruthers, and I got to know about that while I'm dying of cancer. And to make it even more complicated, he's so delirious that he's doing stupid shit. He's the one who comes up with the idea of like opening up the nuclear reactor in hopes that it will flood the compartment with radiation and kill the monster.
It is also, by the way, kind of a cool setup. Like, once you have the setup of they're in the lower levels of the spaceship and it's moving up until finally they get to where we can't go anywhere else.
Yeah,
like, this is the cabin. Like,
thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, you're right.
It's actually a really, really cool setup, and kind of flows into what we see in an Alien. Well, we can't go anywhere else but the rescue ship, right?
Right.
So that setup and that moving from place to place, and even though we've kind of brought up some of the pitfalls of this movie or the kind of problems, when the guy is trapped and he's broken his leg because he was fighting the monster and he's trapped there with the oxyacetylene torch, and the monster keeps coming back and he has to fight it off each time, and there's this like ticking bomb where he goes, hey, this says I have 3 hours, and I really hope that they're right. Basically, he's trusting the manufacturer's suggested time, but he knows also none of the manufacturers have ever had to fight off a monster for 3 hours, so I don't know. And that's
a great bit, isn't it?
Playing with things that are really, really cool bits.
You could do that bit today. You could do that today. We could go watch a movie this week, and the guy is like trapped in a corner, and all he has is his torch. And so every time the monster comes near, he turns, he flares the torch. It's great.
And they're concerned too, where he's keeping them informed on the radio. Hey, came back. Hey, I'm doing this at each time. That's really cool.
All of that was fantastic. I like the relationships between the people. I like the suspense. The monster's super scary. It's really creative how they finally end up killing him by putting on their spacesuits and just getting rid of all the oxygen so that he suffocates, which is awful. That's definitely needed to happen.
Which is possibly the most alien-ish thing in the whole. Like it really does feel like the last moments. Although Ripley outright blows the alien out of the airlock.
Right. Yes. Well, they couldn't do that in this because they would have. He just doesn't, like, he's holding on, and nobody's going to go push him because then they'll go with him. So
I don't even think
they probably couldn't afford to show the alien, the Martian here, space vampire, whatever you want to call it, flying out into, that's a stunt that would have involved wires and whatnot that they probably couldn't have afforded to do either.
Yeah, he's almost a space Komodo dragon because of the way like Komodo dragons will bite something and just let it crawl off, and their bites are so disgusting that they usually die.
I was super angry that they didn't try to save Gino. I was like, poor Gino. They could have saved him because he wasn't dead yet when they originally.
Hey, they just got to let that Martian use him as a smoothie.
That was sad.
Yeah, that is pretty bad. I love also, but during that sequence, as much kind of just like Frankenstein's monster acting as it does, it's truly horrific when it's suffocating. Like the way it kind of wriggles around, and that the actor in the suit is really trying to give it this horrible, effective death, and I thought that was really.
I don't know though, because
cool.
I've read stories that Crash Corrigan was drunk when he filmed this. Yeah, because he resented having to play a monster, which is why he also refused to have the mask properly fit to his face. So they had to make his chin look like a tongue, which it does. They get a reasonable job with what they had to do, but I think if when the monster looks good in this, I think that's probably almost by accident or because by the filmmaker, knew how to shoot around having a drunk actor. If he was really drunk, if that is to be believed, which by the way, the reason why I keep calling it the Space Vampire is the original title for this was It the Vampire from Beyond Space. So I changed it. I like that name better. But I could see why they changed it because it makes it seem like it's more of a Dracula type thing than this is. But I don't know. I've always called it the Space Vampire anytime ever since I learned that. So when I see it, I haven't been able. I can't call it. I don't know why. I guess because of the more famous, Stephen King creature. I just can't bring myself to call this thing it, even though it was technically it for several decades before the It that Stephen King created.
That would be terrible. Sorry, Jason.
No, please. Yeah.
It would be terrible if I'm saying, oh, well, he had this really effective death scene, and then, somehow you find out behind the scenes, like, no, he was shaking himself awake, or no, he was just like puking in the suit because he was drunk as hell. That would be, I'm gonna pretend at least, or go with the fact that that he's doing a really good job acting, and not that it's some horrible drunken twitch that he's doing. Because I thought it was really interesting.
Have either of you seen the Undersea Kingdom, the Ray Crash Corrigan serial that he was famous for? I don't know if I've seen it since the Matinee at the Bijou days. But
man, I think that's on Prime. It's on something, because I've watched all of that serial stuff. Is definitely Tony's late night insomnia.
Sounds fabulous.
Food.
I mean, I want to watch it this week. Honestly, it sounds like a great thing to just make your way through. So
yeah, all the Flash Gordon stuff, all that. I know for a fact I watched it on some Roku channel. I want to say it's on Prime, but I have a bunch of just random watch old cool fun stuff channels on my Roku. So I can't.
Well, it's also on.
Sure.
It's definitely on YouTube. It goes back to 36. I think it's in the public domain now.
Right.
So yeah, I see YouTube has it.
Channels.
Yeah. Anyway, yes. Okay, so we should probably wrap up. Is there anything that we have missed that we should discuss here? That we haven't. I want to point out, I think it's interesting that the movie takes the time to introduce a love triangle, which is hilarious, given that they don't spend much time on much else, but they do spend time on a love triangle. Like that's where the bread is buttered, where the audience is going to want to see officers fighting over the lady doctors, for who's going to bring them coffee, I guess. Anything else that we should mention before we go to our final thoughts?
Well, yeah, because it is interesting that they don't just end it with, hey, we've suffocated the monster and we had to kill poor Gino, but the scientists go, wow, that was really dangerous. Let's not go back to Mars.
Don't go back. Right. Mars is
the other name for Mars. The other name for Mars is death.
And they just kind of ended like, we had no more Mars.
I had no use for these bookends. Like, I feel like, I know this is already a short movie, but they add nothing. And
well, no, they should have added more dialogue in the middle in the movie. No, the idea that they've sent a report to Earth, and rather than say, here are the facts of what happened, it's like this poetic thing about Mars. It's like, wait, what does that mean? I'm just imagining the journalist going, what? Why? What? Can you explain what happened?
It just feels like padding, because I think you're right. I think because they had such little dialogue, they probably oh man, we're several minutes shy of being a feature. We have this to be a little longer for it to play in drive-ins, and so they probably tacked those on. I'm guessing. Again, I'm not a scholar of the production of this movie. I'm guessing that they.
It's a good guess. If you think about like movies, it used to be they would have to, make them slightly longer to pad for like television running time if you sold a movie into television. And so typically, one thing you could do is just have a couple actors be like cops or reporters and discuss the stuff that's been going on, and you write it in such a way that it isn't patently obvious that this is all being discussed. Like it's just a couple of characters that have been inserted. They did that with Halloween, so you could get creative here, but they don't.
I just that stuff, like, more than anything, more than like grenades in outer space, like I don't know, the two bookends just really annoyed the shit out of me.
That's
like I
really
wish they weren't
funny.
in the movie. Yeah, I don't know why I'm being pandemic, but like it just bugged me because it's so unnecessary. Julie is absolutely right though. Like they should have maybe done another draft of the script and had more dialogue, but maybe it wouldn't have been like that. Would have taken away from the stuff in this movie that actually does work, which is it's legit for all its flaws. It is legitimately suspenseful. Like this movie holds your attention the whole way through.
Yeah, wonderful.
That's true.
Absolutely.
That sounds like a final thought, but let's do it anyway. Go ahead, Joy. Yeah.
Well, you can throw to me for the final thoughts then, because I was first anyway. So yeah, I think I think the effects are quite lovely. I never felt the whole time like I was looking at a set, or like I was looking at somebody. Like somebody was holding a rocket and just like. What do you call it? Moving it across the black screen is like, it looked like, the actual, Mars was Mars and the rocket is in space and the rocket is a rocket. I thought that was great. All of that was very well done.
That's a really good point.
And I think, I think the costumes are great. I think the acting is fantastic. So really, yeah, for me, it's more the script and the flaws in just how unrealistic it is that they would be blowing things up on the ship. Those kinds of things. The way that they treat the women is just how they treated women back then, and it's always going to be unfortunate when women are relegated to being the coffee servers even when they have MDs, but whatever, it's fine. It is what it is. It would definitely have been nice for there to be some diversity, but again, this is the time we're dealing with, and there just really wasn't going to be a lot of that. I am very happy that once the space program did become a real thing, that it pretty quickly had a lot of diversity, which is good. But anyway, but yeah, I thought, like I say, I think it's worth taking in. It's an hour, like in 10 minutes, or whatever it is, of your time. So I think it's entertaining, and it is suspenseful. But there are going to be things that are going to bug you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Tony, The Terror from Beyond Space.
Yeah, like I said, I enjoy the movie, and I think it's cool to go back and kind of look at the early DNA of what became Alien and other creature features as well, but definitely Alien. I think the setup is interesting, and warts and all, it does have some cool effects. I think the creature is great, and when it is suspenseful, it's really cool. Like there's a lot of elements. A person dying because now they found out that the monster can cause this disease, so they have to be careful of that. The radiation, hey, let's try this. They try to electrify it.
Yeah.
They're trying all the stuff when they're slowly moving the monster further and further and closer to the point of no return. All of that stuff I think is really interesting and cool. We joke about it now, but again, I'm going to go with it makes a lot of sense in the timeline that this movie was created. The year that it's created, all that stuff makes sense. And like Drew said, maybe you don't have the budget for ray guns, but it doesn't really matter because everybody understands what all these weapons are.
Yeah.
So even though it does seem pretty crazy when they first pulled out a carton of, a case of grenades, like, ooh, I don't know about this. But all of it, even the bazooka makes us, it's one of those things where, later on in action movies, when you saw a rocket launcher or you see the rocket launcher in Commando and you see how that's aped, or a chain gun, even though you wouldn't hold a chain gun like you see in some movies. It is synonymous with, I'm going to take care of business. Like nothing, this will help take out a tank. Of course it will take out a creature. So the shorthand, even though, yes, bad idea to fire a bazooka in a spaceship, the shorthand is, this is the top of the line thing. If it doesn't kill this monster, we're also in really bad shape. Like we're in terrible trouble because this thing can take out really tough weapons of war. So I think that's more of what they're going for, and I think that's pretty fascinating. Suspense wise, it's a fun B movie. I don't regret, there's far worse that we've even covered, and I think it's really cool to go back. I mean, we're always talking about like, hey, why don't you go back to the influences of the things that you like? To see that here, especially with the torch and where the fire thing kind of comes from. Yeah, maybe they had fire in Frankenstein, but it's kind of treated differently, and it's also a more futuristic thing, and it gives all those great bits of business. That's a pretty good line where he's like, hey, the manufacturers better be right about this. There's so many times we see that in further space movies where somebody radios back, realistically goes, hey, tell the eggheads that this thing that they said better work. Where the engineers have told an astronaut like, oh yeah, that'll work, and then maybe they go, oh, of course it will, and they might look at each other like, yeah, right?
Yes.
So all of that is really cool business. It's a short movie. I think it's worth your time if you're kind of on the same wavelength.
Wonderful. Thank you. Drew, do you have anything?
I think in some ways I was kind of hard on this movie because it isn't flawless. Like, I'm not blind to that, but I do think it has a lot going on there because it was very evidently an extremely low budget movie. But despite this, I think it's consistently engaging. It's got a cool looking rubber suit monster. It's with the exception of ray guns, it's got basically everything you could want for a movie of this type from this time period. So I think this movie, if you like 1950s rubber suit monster movies, I think this is a pretty good one. And, you know, in terms of being suspenseful, actually above average, because you know, a lot of the times, you know, low budget movies tend to skimp on actually creating an atmosphere of dread. This accomplishes that, and you know, that impresses me. I'm glad I finally watched this, because I it felt like a movie I had seen, because I was just so used to seeing clips from it and seeing stills from it. So it was interesting actually to sit down and watch it. I actually kind of wonder why it took me so long to get around to watching it, considering that it is easily obtainable and also extremely short. So if you know, that's my recommendation, if this kind of thing appeals to you at all, or if you just want to see one of the things that helped create Alien, this movie is easy to get a hold of.
Fantastic. Thank you. Just to keep it very short, I endorse everything that you guys said, and really, what a wonderful film to go back to after the two that we just did, which are true classics. To sort of go back in this direction, you know, I just enjoyed the heck out of this. I have no idea if the next movie that we're doing, which is another Road to Alien film, I have no idea if we'll enjoy it as much, but we might. Who knows? I believe the last time and that film that's next is Planet of the Vampires. I believe, Tony, maybe I'm imagining this, but I could swear that you and I saw Planet of the Vampires at some really god-awful hour during one of the Button-Umathons, and that I remember nothing.
I think that's entirely possible. I have to look it up again, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
don't care what, like, Planet of the Vampires, if you like it or not, the throwing cool stuff, cool-looking suits, and cinematography up on screen, that film, I'm stoked.
Yeah, I'm with you about that. I absolutely am with you that I know right now it is a absolute classic as far as look and feel. But anyway, Terror from Beyond Space, I really enjoyed this. Let's get our the endorsements. Whatever you are recommending that people watch or read that you've been watching or reading. Julia, do you have anything to share with us?
I'm trying to remember what we've watched this week. I know that I endorsed WandaVision last week, so that it was getting better. It's getting better and better. It's just great. But I can't think of anything at the moment new. So if I do, I'll come back. I'll pop back in. But for now, I'm gonna.
I mean, our daughter has become obsessed with Community, so I've been watching a lot of Community with her. So
yeah, that's you guys' thing.
Yeah. All right, Tony, what about you?
Kind of non-horror. I started being kind of fascinated by the documentary Lady in the Dale. I hadn't been exposed to this story, and I think it's kind of interesting just to kind of go in blind. In my opinion, it's a extremely complicated case for a lot of reasons, and I have found it to be pretty fascinating. And it's that I think it's handled really well. It's done the way that the documentary is shot, interspersing these kind of animated sequences. It's pretty interesting overall. I actually don't want to say too much about it, because I think for me, not knowing enough about the subject matter, you know, it's this case. I liked going through it, kind of just finding out about it. So I found that the Lady in the Dale, Dale, D-A-L-E.
And where do you find it?
To be pretty fascinating. HBO Max.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And then also, I feel remiss that I didn't talk about this, because I saw it at Fantastic Fest. There's a documentary, Memory, The Origins of Alien. And I was even more surprised because I enjoyed it at Fantastic Fest. I was looking through reviews, and a lot of people really hated this documentary. So I'm guessing that your mileage may vary. I was actually trying to get... I couldn't arrange at the time. I was trying to get interviews with the filmmakers, because I had talked to them, and then the people who did the music. They were really pretty cool. I was, however, surprised on Amazon at how many angry people there were.
Why do people?
So
I saw
guess-
I saw that documentary and I actually thought it was really good. But what didn't people like about it?
I guess some people thought that there wasn't enough stuff. They covered too much that people already knew, and then other people, I don't know. There's a wide range of people angry about it, but it's weird to me. But I feel bad because it should have been like the thing I mentioned as kind of just other subsequent subject matter on Alien, and I can't believe I didn't mention it before. It's just one of those.
It's hard.
Stuff, but...
I mean, it's hard, Tony, to like do. I imagine, I don't make documentaries, right? But I imagine it's hard to make a documentary about a topic that has already been talked about a lot, because you just run the risk of people going, "Man, there's nothing here that we haven't already heard about." But what I liked in that documentary, Memory, is that a huge chunk of it is really just a biography of Dan O'Bannon. So if you're kind of interested in that, then
maybe that's, and some people complained about that actually, like, well, I want to know more about Alien. But to me, you can kind of get that on a lot of the Blu-rays. So being a fan, I was down with that being like, I'm okay with that. So maybe that's why I say, according to reviews, your mileage may vary. You might already know most of this, if not all of it. That's possible. But I thought the angles they chose to explore were interesting. So I'm going to say that I enjoyed it. Don't at me if you didn't. But I just still think like, why didn't I mention that before?
I could swear that we brought it up.
Jason and I talked about it because that's what we had watched.
Oh.
But
okay.
Yeah. But you and I, we're all doing this so much that it's actually hard to remember sometimes if we discuss something actually before we're recording or after. But I'm pretty sure that we mentioned it because it's on Prime, by the way. You can see it on there. Cool. Well, thank you, Tony. Drew, what about you?
Well, first off, I took a suggestion from Tony from a couple of weeks ago, and I saw Psycho Goreman the other day, which is a delightful movie, and I would best describe it as the love child of Gwar and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It's about, and I know Tony already recommended it, but for those. I know there are people that jump around from episodes, so I'm just going to briefly describe it for those who have not heard his recommendation. It's about a pair of kids who accidentally dig up a ancient alien supervillain, and the bratty sister gets a stone that allows her to control him, and wackiness ensues, and also lots and lots of blood and guts.
Interesting.
So it's a tonally all over, like, it's definitely not for everybody, because like it's like one part kids movie and one part like extremely violent, twisted, dark comedy. So I can see why it wouldn't exactly play to everybody, but it's for me, it was like the right flavor of weird for the week I watched it. The other thing that I just watched, I actually watched this before I came on the podcast, is I watched the first episode of Resident Alien, which is a Sci-Fi Channel show starring Alan Tudyk as a space alien pretending to be a doctor in a small town solving mysteries, but he's also on Earth to destroy the world. So you have an alien invasion plot, but also basically diagnosis murder, for those of you who are old enough to remember that TV show. And Alan Tudyk is great, like he's a great character actor, but here he's the lead, and he's really funny. And I've only watched the first episode, but I'm very curious of where it's going to go. So you can watch it if you have the Sci-Fi Channel app on your Roku box, or of course you could just watch it on Sci-Fi Channel. But highly recommended as well.
Did you read the comics, Drew?
I did not. I actually just learned it was a comic book tonight. I'm sadly unfamiliar, but the comics sound cool too.
Yeah, supposedly I read a lot of people who weren't as happy because it wasn't as close to the comics as they would like. But I don't have a frame of reference for that either. I was just curious, since you like this, if you had seen it and what your thoughts were.
I can only review it as the show. And as the show, I thought it was enjoyable. Like if I can understand if people were disappointed about it not being like the comic book, but since I have not read that, but I
Sure.
really liked it. And if you like that kind of small town murder mystery, Murder She Wrote kind of thing, but always felt like it needed more sci-fi. Here's your jam right now. So those are my recommendations for the week.
Very cool. Thank you very much. My only recommendation is that, as you know, we're good friends with the guys over at the Monster Movie Happy Hour. They also did an episode on It, the Terror from Beyond Space. So you should check that out and compare what we thought. Right now, I cannot remember where they came down. I think they were somewhere in the middle. So I need to go back and re-listen to that myself. So anyway, that brings us to the end of our discussion of It, the Terror from Beyond Space. There are also a couple of comic book adaptations of this. IDW did one about 10 years ago, and Millennium did one about 25 years ago. So there are two rather contemporary comic book adaptations of It, the Terror from Beyond Space to check out. And that's it. We'll be back next week with Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires, and I can't wait. Everyone be excellent to one another, and I'll see you then. Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Night.
Night.